154. This is the amount of teams that have made the NBA Finals over the NBA's history. The amount of teams that have proved they're actually ready for the tall task. But not every title contending team is equal. It's actually far from it. Every team that's made it to this promised land has been a little different than all the other ones. Some superstars have had to will their almost non-existent supporting cast to the finals. Other stars have had the luxury of playing with other like-minded superstars. But which superstar has willed their team to the finals despite having one of the most unhelpful, unproductive, and quite frankly, absolutely garbage supporting cast around them? We're gonna find which superstar had the worst supporting cast of all time, but there's a couple of rules to explain this. First off, I'm only gonna use teams that are from 1960 and later, teams that actually resemble some form of basketball. Second off, only teams that qualified for the NBA Finals will be used during this experiment. So according to both of these two rules, this drops the number of teams being used from 154 to 128. From 77 years of basketball to 64. Next off, the competition these players played against won't affect how much of a carry job these players had to go through, although I might mention it here or there just to add some context, not to add or subtract value from a playoff run. Final note, the result of this experiment is not just purely off of which team had the worst supporting cast, but it's a mix between the supporting cast and how much production the best player on the team gives. So the team that has the highest producing star, coupled with the lowest producing squad, will be crowned the winner. So I did some research, and by some I did a lot of research into this topic, going through hours of finding numbers just to find only the most qualified teams and players. After doing this, I came up with a solid top 10 carry jobs in NBA history. But before we start, I have two quick honorable mentions. The first honorable mention I want to talk about is the 2005 and 6 Miami Heat led by Dwayne Wade. I know you're probably thinking, didn't he have Shaq on this team? Well, yes, you're right. But not only was this an older Shaq at 33 years old, but during the 2006 NBA Finals, Shaq had a historic meltdown. I mean, the Heat were even subbing him out of the end of games because this man couldn't hit a damn free throw. This is what the starting lineup looks like in the playoffs. It's a disgrace. The only other player that Wade had around him offensively, besides an inconsistent Shaq, was Antoine Walker, who almost shot less than 40% from the field. Besides that, the Heat had Udonis Haslem, James Posey, and Jason Williams, White Chocolate, who I guess did something, but not a lot. And the next honorable mention, who you guys are probably expecting a little higher, is the 2000 and 2001 76ers led by Allen Iverson. And this team on offense was completely carried by Iverson. He averaged 31, 3, and 4. The rest of the starting lineup was Theo Radif, who averaged 12 and 8, Dikembe Mutombo, who averaged 11 and 12, Eric Snow, who averaged 9 and 7 assists, and George Lynch and Tyrone Hill, who both averaged under 10 points a game. A really common spoken criticism about this team is that Allen Iverson shot the ball too much. I mean, just purely looking at the stats, it looks somewhat true because he averaged 30 field goal attempts per game and shot 42%. But if we really look into this, it's actually the complete opposite story. Right here, this chart shows the relationship between Iverson's shot attempts a game, which is the x-axis, and the result of the game, which is the y-axis. This shows all of Iverson's 22 playoff games. The green dots mean the 76ers won, and the red dots mean they lost. As we can see, the results look kind of mixed until we get to the opposite side of each spectrum. When Iverson shot the ball 26 times or less, the 76ers lost every single playoff game. But when Iverson shot the ball 35 times or more, the 76ers won every playoff game. When Iverson shot the ball between 27 and 34 times, pretty standard for him, the Sixers won 57% of their games. Remember that 128 number I mentioned earlier in the video? The amount of teams that have made the finals in the last 64 years? Well, the 76ers in 2001 ranked dead last, number 128 in supporting cast scoring. The 76ers without Iverson averaged a measly 63.6 points a game. The next closest team was the 1998 Bulls without Jordan, and they scored 68 a game. But the only reason why they're only an honorable mention is the fact that they were a really solid defensive team. They ranked top 5 in both defensive rating and points allowed. I mean, Dikembe Mutombo was the defensive player of the year. Theo Radif averaged 3.7 blocks a game. Iverson had 2.5 steals a game, and Eric Snow and Aaron McKee were both solid perimeter defenders. Now, on to our actual top 10. At number 10, I have the 1993 and 94 Houston Rockets. Now, the Rockets of 1994 were a one-man show. Hakeem Olajuwon was the team. And this team is actually very similar to the Iverson Sixers. This team was terrible on offense. They ranked 16 of 128 in least supporting cast points scored. I mean, Hakeem's second best player was Ottis Thorpe, who averaged 14 and 10. Besides that, the Rockets had Vernon Maxwell, Robert Horry, Chris Gent, Kenny Smith, who were all hovering around the 10 to 13 point range. But I say this team was similar to Iverson's Sixers because this team was actually pretty good at defense. Hakeem was the Defensive Player of the Year and MVP. The Rockets were second in the league in defensive rating, fifth in points allowed, and third in opponent field goal percentage. But this team was just non-existent on offense besides Hakeem. Our number 9 ranked team is actually the 1999 and 2000 Lakers. And before you get mad in the comments saying they had Kobe, hear me out. The Lakers led by Shaq was actually a pretty hard carry job. First off, Shaq led the league in win shares with 18.6, 3 more than the next highest, which was Karl Malone with the Jazz. Shaq, in terms of the percentage of points, rebounds, and assists combined he produces for this team, places second of 128 with a percentage of 27.5%. This is what it looks like on a chart. This is general contributions, so points, rebounds, and assists that these 128 players have produced. Shaq's 2000 season placed him right here, pretty high. Iverson is right here in red, and Dwayne Wade is right here. But unfortunately, I can't spoil away all the other teams. In terms of individual players, Shaq had a young 21-year-old Kobe around him who averaged 21 points a game in the playoffs, and a 32-year-old Glenn Rice who averaged 12 a game. It's the fact that Shaq did so much for this team, which carries him into the top 9. This one might surprise you. The 1991 Bulls were actually a pretty lopsided team with Jordan leading the way. This team is similar to the 2000 Lakers, where their supporting cast wasn't horrendous like some of these other teams we've seen, but the fact that the number 1 player is doing so much ranks them so high. Michael Jordan in 91 led the league in win shares at 20.3. We've only seen 17 other seasons where a player has had 20 or more win shares. Michael Jordan was responsible for 33.3% of the Bulls' regular season wins, which puts him 8th of 128 in win share contributions, which is the percentage of wins you're responsible for getting your team. Besides a younger and inexperienced Scottie Pippen, the Bulls had Horace Grant, who averaged 12 and 8 a game, Bill Cartwright, who put up 9 and 6, and John Paxson with just 8 and 3 assists. Although the perimeter defense was great with Jordan and Pippen, averaging over 5 steals a game combined, the interior defense of this team was terrible. Now, this one might really surprise you. Next up, we have the 2011 and 2012 Miami Heat. This situation is a lot like the Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen one. Now, I know what you're thinking. Didn't they have Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh around LeBron James? Well, yes, but this 2011 and 12 Miami Heat ranked 2nd of 28 of having the least productive supporting cast, with a combined number of points, rebounds, and assists per night only at 118.9. Besides LeBron James, there was no one on this team that was averaging more than 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks a game. LeBron James ranked as the 5th most productive star of the 128 in terms of producing points, rebounds, and assists. And to top all this off, Chris Bosh missed 9 of the 23 playoff games that year. So their next best big man was either Udonis Haslem or Joel Anthony. And they didn't sign Ray Allen until the season after that. At number 6, we have the 06 and 07 Cavs. LeBron James virtually had no one around him offensively. LeBron averaged a solid 25, 8, and 8. His squad around him was Zydrunas Ilgauskas, who put up 13 and 10 a game, Drew Gooden with 11 and 8, and Larry Hughes with 11 points on 35% shooting. The 2007 Cavs ranked 3rd all-time of the 128 teams in least amount of points from a supporting cast with only 69.5, and ranked 4th of 128 in least total supporting cast production, so points, rebounds, and assists. The only thing that this team did have going for them is defense. They were ranked 4th in the league for defensive rating and 5th in the league for points allowed. But this isn't the last of LeBron in this video. Now, I'm sure you were expecting to see this one on here. LeBron James and the Crackhead Army of 2018. And although LeBron really put this team on his back, he was third in the league with win shares with 14. LeBron contributed 25.6% of all points, rebounds, and assists to the Cavs in 2018, which ranks him 8th all-time of the 128 stars. LeBron averaged 27, 8, and 9 in the regular season, but raised it to 34, 9, and 9 in the postseason. During the playoffs, LeBron only had one scorer that averaged double-digit scoring numbers, and that was Kevin Love with 14.9 points and 10.2 rebounds, but he shot less than 40% from the field and less than 35% from three. And this team was terrible on defense. The 2018 Cavs were ranked 29th in the league for defensive rating and 26th in points allowed and 28th in opponent field goal percentage. And this is mainly why they rank above the 2007 Cavs. At number 4, we have the Spurs of 2002 and 2003. And this one might seem a little surprising. The Spurs around Tim Duncan might have had one of the worst supporting casts of all time. Outside of Tim Duncan, the Spurs only produced 118.3 points, rebounds, and assists, which is actually the lowest number of any team ever. Their supporting cast was 10th worst in scoring and was the 4th worst at rebounding all time. This seems kind of weird. Didn't the Spurs have Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and David Robinson all in one team? Well, Manu Ginobili was a rookie and David Robinson was 37, and both of them averaged less than 10 points a game. And Tony Parker was on his second year with the Spurs and averaged less than 15 points a game. So it was pretty lopsided for Tim Duncan. He led the Spurs in points, rebounds, blocks, and even assists. Duncan put up 25, 15, and 5 and 3 blocks during this playoff run. At number 3, I have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with the 1971 Milwaukee Bucks. And Kareem didn't really have the worst supporting cast, but it certainly wasn't great either. Kareem's supporting cast only ranks 86 of 128 in least productive, which is above average compared to most of these teams. But also factor in that back in the early 70s, the pace of play in the league was a lot higher, so it inflated the numbers. But Kareem was a monster during this year. He ranked 7th in win share contributions and 6th in general contributions. Kareem actually had the highest win share total of any player that won a championship. Although looking at their starting lineup, you may think Kareem had all the help he could want, but I would argue that Kareem was more essential than any other star for rebounding and especially defense. But unfortunately, steals and blocks weren't a stat back then. At number 2, we have Moses Malone with the 1981 Houston Rockets. And the Rockets were the 6th seed in the West with a losing record of 40-42, but they still somehow found a way to the finals. They beat the Showtime Lakers, George Gervin Spurs, beat the Kansas City Kings, who, fun fact, also had a record of 40-42. I think this alone is enough to justify him at the number 2 spot. Moses Malone put up an insane 27-14 in the playoffs. Although Moses had some decent players around him, Malone just did so much for this team. Malone had 13.7 win shares that year, which is more than 1/3 of the whole team's win total. That ranks him 5th all-time in win share contributions. The Rockets are the only team since 1960 in NBA history to make the finals with a losing record. But despite doing all of this, there's still one player better. And in my opinion, the biggest carry job we've ever seen by an NBA player in history was Wilt Chamberlain with the 1963 and 64 San Francisco Warriors. And it's actually pretty obvious. Wilt Chamberlain averaged an insane 35 and 25 during the postseason. In 1964, the San Francisco Warriors had a record of 48 and 32, a pretty decent record, but nothing special compared to some of these teams. Wilt Chamberlain had a mind-boggling 25 win shares that season. That means that Wilt was responsible for more than half of the wins that the Warriors got that season. Wilt Chamberlain, of all the 128 superstars that led their teams to the finals, ranked number 1 in win share contributions, the concept I just talked about with Wilt. And he's winning by a landslide. Right here below is a chart showing these numbers from the NBA's lifespan. Wilt's playoff run is right here, the highest peak on this chart. The same is true for general contributions. Wilt contributed 32.1% of the Warriors' points, rebounds, and assists in 1964, better than any other star could do. And that's right here, by the way. Right here we have yet another chart which shows the relationship between supporting cast contributions, points, rebounds, and assists, and the individual win shares of the team's best player. The farther right and down this dot is, that means the best player was really valuable and the supporting cast was bad, which is what we're trying to find. And the farther up and left you go, it means the exact opposite. Your best player wasn't as good, and your supporting cast was relatively better. We don't want to find this. Some of the best playoff runs from an individual here are Clyde Drexler in 1992 and 90, Kareem in 1971, Jordan in 91 and 96, LeBron in 2012 and 13, Tim Duncan in 2003, and Shaq in 2000. But where's Wilt though? I thought this playoff run was all that. Well, it's right here. The farthest one right and low. This is the exact same graph, but instead of win shares, it's the combined points, rebounds, and assists of the team's best player on the x-axis. You have Elgin Baylor in 1963 right here, Kareem in 1971, Shaq in 2000 and 2001. You even have Wilt Chamberlain in 1967 right here with the 76ers. But where is Wilt from 1964 though? Oh, he's right here, in a league of his own. I make my case clear.